Hello everyone, greetings from NCCI Studios West. I'm Barry Lipton, practice leader and senior actuary for NCCI, and our topic today is latest trends in worker demographics. We're going to cover the aging workforce and its implications, gender and education, and short-tenured workers. First up, the aging workforce. This chart shows a growth of 9 million workers in the U.S. labor force between 2018 and 2028. The growth is coming from two age categories, 65 and older and 25 to 44. Because of this growth, the share of workers aged 65 and older will grow from 6% to almost 10% by 2028. Now, this forecast was prepared before the coronavirus outbreak, but 2028 is far enough into the future that long-term trends should dominate, and the conclusions will still hold. Let's look at the frequency for these different age groups. The 25 to 44-year-old age group of workers continue their long-term favorable frequency decline. However, workers 65 and older, which used to have the lowest frequency of all the age groups, have seen increases in frequency for the last 2 years. The other two age groups are continuing a favorable downward trend. We're not yet worried about the 16 to 24 age group's uptick in the latest year, but we'll continue to monitor it. Now let's turn our attention to severity. Our severity metric is going to be the days away from work due to an injury that causes time away. The median across all workers is 8 days. However, for the youngest workers, it's 5 days, and the oldest workers are 14 days. Let's look at it by injury category. These three injury categories make up almost 85% of the injuries reported to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Falls, slips, and trips rise from 5 days for the youngest workers to 17 days away for the oldest workers. This is a very important category for these older workers because almost 50% of the injuries are in this category. Overexertion has an even steeper gradient, from 4 days to 20 days, almost 5 times. And contact injuries are from 4 days to 6 days, a more milder gradient, with a peak in the 45 to 54 age category. Now let's look at gender and education. This slide shows the growth in the U.S. workforce since 2015. And for the age category 55 and up, the male component of the labor force grew quicker than the female component. The converse is true at younger ages. Why this difference? Well, we think education plays a role. This slide shows the share of men with 4-year degrees at different age groups versus the share of women. For older ages, the share of men with 4-year degrees is higher. Well, that correlates with a white-collar job, in other words, a job that doesn't require physical labor. That's a key consideration for working through your 60s. At younger ages, the share of women with 4-year degrees is higher. Well, as the workforce ages, these women will still maintain their degrees, and eventually the share of older women with 4-year degrees will catch up and exceed those of men. So we think women's participation in the labor force at older ages is likely to increase. Once again, this is a long-term trend, 10 to 15 years in the future, long after coronavirus is in our rearview mirror. Now let's talk about short-tenured employees. By short tenure, I mean a worker who's been on the job for 12 months or less. These new workers make up 20% of the workforce, but suffer a third of the injuries. That's in contrast to the workers with 5 or more years of tenure, who make up half of the workforce and incur a third of the injuries. The concern is that post-coronavirus, the share of short-tenured workers and their injuries is going to rise. But let's think about that for a second. A worker returning from a layoff can be going back to the same job with the same employer. Or they could be working at a similar job but with a new employer. Or it could be a brand new occupation in a totally different sector. It stands to reason that each of these groups will have different pressure on the employer's frequency. So why is this important? From a claims perspective, a worker-centric model requires knowing the injured worker. Older workers tend to have comorbidities, and women have different comorbidities than men. From an underwriting perspective, tenure and turnover is important, but the historical patterns on the account don't apply. We need to develop new information and perhaps interpret it in a more nuanced fashion. Finally, from a loss prevention standpoint, we can see that extra focus on older workers and short-tenured workers is bound to pay dividends. That concludes my remarks for today. I hope you found them insightful. If so, please look for our upcoming paper to be published on ncci.com. Thank you.